My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and that little sound was the end of my world as I knew it. I picked it up and saw a picture from a number I didn't know. It was a woman in a beautiful white wedding dress. Then I saw the text underneath from my daughter-in-law, Tiffany. Thought you'd like to see what you missed. My breath caught in my throat. It was her. And that meant my son, my only child Mark, was married. And I wasn't there. Friend, before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you who I am. My name is Carol, and I'm a widow from a small town in Ohio. Until that Tuesday afternoon, I thought I had a family. I thought I had a son who loved me. Tiffany's text message showed me I was wrong about everything. That picture wasn't just a picture, it was a message. It was a statement of power. I looked closer at the photo on my little screen. There was my son Mark standing beside her in a handsome tuxedo. He was smiling, but it wasn't his real smile. I know his real smile. It's the one that makes his eyes crinkle up at the corners, just like his father's used to. This smile was empty. It was a mask. And his new wife stood beside him, looking like a queen who had just won a war. I had to hear his voice. I had to know why. What I didn't know was that when I picked up the phone to call him, I was about to find out I didn't really have a son anymore. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages as I tapped Mark's name on my phone. My heart hammered against my ribs with every ring. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Then it went to his voicemail. His cheerful voice filled my ear. "Hey, you've reached Mark. Leave a message." It felt like a punch to the gut. I took a shaky breath and left a message. "Mark, honey, it's Mom. Please call me. I just got a text from Tiffany. Please, just call me back." I hung up and sent him a text. "Mark, I need to talk to you. What is going on?" The little word delivered appeared under my message, a tiny blue speck of hope. I waited. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the clock on the wall. Tick, tock. An hour went by, then 2. The silence in my house was so loud it felt like screaming. Finally, after hours of staring at the phone, my hope turned into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed his name to call again, but this time it didn't even ring. A cold robot voice said something that broke my heart all over again. "The number you have dialed has been blocked." He hadn't just ignored me. He, or the woman who was now his wife, had erased me. They had cut the line between a mother and her only child. And I was starting to realize that the wedding wasn't the end of my pain. It was just the beginning. Being blocked felt like having a door slammed in my face. It was so final, so cruel. With my son's phone number now a dead end, I turned to the only place I could think of, the internet. My hands were trembling as I typed Tiffany's name into the search bar. Her social media page was the first thing that popped up, and it was completely public. She wanted the world to see. The page was filled with wedding photos, dozens of them. There she was, laughing with her mother. There she was, dancing with her father. And there was my son Mark, in every picture, his arm wrapped tight around her, surrounded by her family. Strangers, all of them strangers, celebrating a day that I should have been a part of. "Look at them," I whispered to the empty room. "They all look so happy." But as I looked closer at my son, I saw it again. That empty look in his eyes. I kept clicking, my heart aching more with every single photo. Then I stopped. My breath hitched. I zoomed in on one picture, a close-up of their hands as they were cutting the cake. Tiffany was smiling at the camera, but it wasn't her smile that made my blood run cold. It was the ring on her finger. A simple, plain gold band. I knew that ring. It was my late husband's wedding ring, and I knew exactly where it was supposed to be, locked away in a secret velvet box in my bedroom. Of course. Here are the next 3 chapters of the story. My husband's ring. On her finger. The world around me went fuzzy, and the only thing I could see was that little glint of gold in the picture on my phone. It wasn't a fancy ring. It was a simple, plain gold band that my Richard never once took off in the 30 years we were married. It was on his hand when he held our son for the first time. It was on his hand the day he died. After he passed, I put that ring in a small velvet-lined music box that I kept on my dresser. I only opened it on our anniversary. I showed my son Mark just once when he was old enough to understand. "This is where I keep my heart," I had told him, my voice thick with tears. "It's where I keep your father." She couldn't have just found it. No one knew about that box but me and him. There's only one way she could have gotten that ring. Mark. My son, Mark, must have gone into my bedroom, opened my secret box, and taken it. He took his father's wedding ring and gave it to a stranger. The thought was like a physical blow, knocking all the air out of me. This wasn't just a secret wedding. This was a robbery. She wasn't just stealing my son. She was stealing my memories. And I suddenly knew I wasn't just dealing with a difficult daughter-in-law. I was dealing with a thief. My own phone was useless against her, a dead piece of plastic. Tiffany had built a wall around my son, and I needed to find a way to break through it. My heart pounding in my chest, I ran out my front door and over to my neighbor Martha's house. I didn't even stop to catch my breath, just knocked on her door until she opened it, a worried look on her face. "Martha, please," I gasped. "I need to use your phone." She let me in without a question. I took her old kitchen phone, the kind with the curly cord, and my fingers trembled as I dialed Mark's number. I prayed he would pick up. I prayed I would hear his voice. The phone began to ring. Once, twice. Then a woman answered. "Hello?" It was her, Tiffany. My voice was barely a whisper. "Tiffany, this is Carol. I need to speak to my son, Mark." There was a small pause on the other end of the line, and then she laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like breaking glass. "Oh, Carol, I wondered if you'd try something like this." Her voice turned as cold as a winter morning. "Mark's very busy starting his new life," she said, each word a tiny, sharp knife. "A life that doesn't include you." And then she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, the coldest sound I had ever heard. I walked back to my own house like I was in a dream. The click of the phone hanging up echoed in my ears. I sank into the old armchair in my living room, the one my husband Richard always used to sit in, and stared at the fireplace. On the mantelpiece was a picture of Mark when he was about 10 years old, holding up a fish he had caught on our trip to Miller's Lake. He had that big, genuine smile on his face, the one that crinkled his eyes, the one I hadn't seen in Tiffany's photos. After Richard passed, it was just me and Mark against the world. We were a team. I went to all his baseball games, and he helped me in the garden. I remembered one night, he was sad because his dad wasn't there to see his school play. I was tucking him into bed, and he grabbed my hand. A week went by in a painful, silent blur. To keep my hands from shaking and my mind from spinning, I decided to do something normal. I decided to get my old papers in order for my taxes. I sat at the dining room table with a big box of receipts and bank statements. Most of them were from the account I had shared with my late husband, Richard. I barely used it anymore, but I kept it open. I was sifting through a pile of papers when my eyes caught something strange. It was a small charge, just $5, not enough to notice usually. But it was there every month for the last 6 months. The name on it was Secure Post Services. I'd never heard of it. I leaned closer, a little knot of worry tightening in my stomach. I looked at the date of the very first charge. It was from the same week my son Mark first brought Tiffany over for that quiet, awkward dinner. That's when the hairs on my arms stood up. The strangest part was the location listed next to the charge. It was from a little town in Nevada I'd never even heard of. Why was there a charge from Nevada on my old Ohio bank account? It was only $5. A part of me wanted to believe it was just a simple mistake. But another part, a cold and frightened part, knew it wasn't. It felt like a thread, and I had a terrible feeling that if I pulled on it, Tiffany's whole secret life might start to unravel. I couldn't stop thinking about that strange charge. 2 days later, the mailman came, just like he does every day. But that day, he brought an envelope that made all the worry about the $5 disappear, replaced by pure ice in my veins. It was a stiff, white business envelope. My name and address were typed perfectly on the front. I opened it with a shaking hand. The letter inside was also typed, on heavy, expensive paper. It wasn't in Mark's usual messy handwriting. The words were cold and strange, like a lawyer had written them. It started, "Dear Carol, not Mom." It said, "I am writing to inform you that I need some space at this time. All future communication must be directed through my wife, Tiffany." My son, my Mark, would never, ever write something like that to me. But the worst part was at the very bottom of the page. It was his name, his signature. I stared at it for a long time. It looked like his name, but it was shaky and wobbly. It looked like the hand that signed it was weak, or maybe even scared. It wasn't the signature of a happy newlywed. It was the signature of a prisoner. I folded the letter, my hands trembling. The secret wedding, my husband's ring, the charge from Nevada, and now this letter. They were all pieces of a terrifying puzzle, and I was finally starting to see the dark and awful picture they were making. I sat with that horrible letter in my hands for a whole day, feeling smaller and more helpless than I ever had in my life. I felt like I was drowning and no one could hear me. Finally, I picked up the phone and called the one person in the world I knew I could trust completely, my best friend, Sarah. Sarah and I have been friends since we were learning to write our names in first grade. She worked as a paralegal for 40 years, so she's as sharp as a tack and doesn't scare easily. My voice broke as I told her everything. The cruel text from Tiffany, my husband's ring on her finger, the blocked phone number, and the cold, typed letter. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Sarah's voice came back, low and serious. "Carol," she said, "this is bad. This is very, very bad." "I know," I whispered. "I don't know what to do." "Yes, you do," Sarah said, her voice suddenly firm and strong. "You're going to let me help. I'm coming over right now, and I'm going to do some digging on this Tiffany. If she has a secret, I promise you, I will find it." Hearing her say that was the first time I felt a tiny spark of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. But as I waited for Sarah to arrive, I couldn't shake a terrible feeling. What if the secret she found was worse than anything I could possibly imagine? Of course. Here are the next 3 chapters of your story. Sarah showed up at my door 20 minutes later with a thermos of strong coffee and a laptop under her arm. She didn't waste any time with hellos. She was all business. She sat down at my dining room table, opened her computer, and her fingers started flying across the keyboard. "Okay, Carol," she said without looking up. "Tell me her full name again, the name she gave Mark." "Tiffany Miller," I said, my voice barely a whisper. For an hour, the only sound in my house was the steady clicking of the keys. I just sat across from her, wringing my hands, feeling my hope shrink with every passing minute. Then, Sarah suddenly stopped. She let out a little puff of air and said, "Oh my!" My head snapped up. "What is it?" I asked, rushing to her side. "What did you find?" She didn't answer. She just turned the laptop screen towards me. My eyes struggled to focus on the words. It was an official-looking document, a public record from a government website. It was a marriage certificate dated 5 years ago from Las Vegas, Nevada. The bride's name was printed in clear black letters, Tiffany Miller. My heart stopped. She was married before? My son, Mark, couldn't have known about this. I was sure of it. Who did she marry?" I whispered. Sarah's face was grim. "That's not even the most shocking part," she said, scrolling down the page. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the document on the screen. The groom's name was listed as Arthur Peterson. Next to his name was his age, 80 years old. At the time of the marriage, Tiffany was only 25. The huge age difference felt wrong, like a warning bell going off in my head. Then Sarah pointed to another document she had already pulled up on the screen. It was a death certificate. He died just 6 months after they got married, Carol, she said, her voice low and serious. The official cause of death was a heart attack in his sleep. But his family fought it. They said his health was perfect before he met her. They said she took all his money and disappeared right after the funeral. My head was spinning. A dead husband. A secret past. I felt sick to my stomach. But then Sarah pointed to one small box on the old marriage certificate. The box for the bride's maiden name. It wasn't Miller. The name on the certificate, the name Tiffany was born with, was Jennifer Stone. Jennifer Stone. The name felt ugly and strange in my mouth. Tiffany Miller was a character she was playing. My son had married a woman who didn't even exist. And if she had lied about something as big as her name, what else was she lying about? Jennifer Stone. The name echoed in the quiet room, and then another word popped into my head. Nevada. The marriage certificate was from Nevada. The dead husband lived in Nevada. Everything was in Nevada. My mind raced back to that strange $5 charge I had found on my old bank statement. The charge from that little town in Nevada. "Sarah!" I said, my voice trembling as I ran to the table where I had left the papers. "Look at this." I shoved the bank statement into her hands and pointed to the Secure Post Services charge. Sarah's eyes went wide. She quickly turned back to her computer and typed the company's name into the search bar. The result came up instantly. It was a business that rented out private mailboxes, P.O. boxes, a place to get mail without anyone knowing your real address. The pieces all clicked into place with a horrible, sickening sound. The mailbox was in her name. Her real name, Jennifer Stone. She had kept a secret address for years in the same state where her first husband had died. The $5 charge wasn't a mistake. It was a link. It was a money trail that connected her past to my present. I looked at Sarah, my heart filled with a new and awful kind of terror. This wasn't about a broken heart anymore. My son hadn't just married a liar. I was terribly afraid he had married a killer. I stared at Sarah, the word killer hanging in the air between us like a thick black smoke. For a moment I felt paralyzed. I was just a widow from Ohio. What was I supposed to do? Sarah, my practical Sarah, took a deep breath and took charge. "Okay, Carol, breathe," she said, her voice firm. "We aren't going to panic. We need more information. We need to talk to someone who knew her back then, when she was Jennifer Stone." She turned back to her laptop and pulled up the old news articles about the death of Tiffany's first husband, Arthur Peterson. One article mentioned a son who had fought her for the inheritance. "His name is Ben Peterson," Sarah read out loud. "He told the papers he thought his father had been taken advantage of." A few more clicks, and Sarah found a phone number for his business in Nevada. My stomach twisted into a knot. "What do I even say to him, Sarah?" I asked. "Hello. I think your father's dead wife just married my son." "You say, 'My name is Carol, and I think my son is in terrible danger from the same woman who hurt your family.'" I took a deep breath, knowing she was right. I couldn't call. I was too scared. So I wrote a short, simple email instead. I told him who I was and that I needed his help. I pressed send, not expecting to ever hear back. But 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number from Nevada. My hand was shaking as I answered. A man's voice, low and tired, said, "This is Ben Peterson. I got your message. We need to talk." I put the phone on speaker so Sarah could hear. Ben Peterson's voice was heavy, filled with an old sadness. He didn't sound surprised at all. "So, she did it again," he said quietly, before I could even finish my story. I was always afraid of this. I told him everything that had happened, from the cruel text message to the fake name on the marriage certificate. When I finished, he told me his story, and it was like listening to my own nightmare. "The woman I knew called herself Jenny," he said. "The first thing she did was cut my father off from us, his family. She said we were too stressful for him. Then she started taking care of his mail and his phone calls, so we could never talk to him alone. That's what she's doing to Mark," I whispered, my eyes meeting Sarah's. Has she isolated your son completely, Carol? Ben asked, his voice suddenly urgent. Yes, I said. Has she taken control of his money? His question hung in the air. I don't know, I stammered. You need to check, Ben insisted. She took every penny my father had before he died. Check his bank accounts. Check everything, especially if he has any kind of inheritance. The word inheritance hit me like a lightning bolt. My late husband, Richard, had left Mark a trust fund, and I suddenly remembered a key rule about that fund, a rule I hadn't thought about in 20 years. As soon as I hung up with Ben, I turned to Sarah, my face pale. The trust fund, I said. Richard set it up so Mark couldn't touch the main part of it until he turned 30, or until the day he got married. It was meant to be a wedding present, to help him start his new family. Sarah's face went grim. Oh, Carol, she must have known. There was only one person who would know for sure. I quickly looked up the number for our family's financial advisor, Mr. Henderson. He had handled our money since Mark was just a boy. My voice was frantic when his secretary put me through. David, it's Carol. I need to ask you about Mark's trust fund. I think he's in terrible danger. At first, he was hesitant. Carol, you know I can't legally discuss Mark's personal accounts with you, he said gently. David, please, I begged, tears welling in my eyes. I'm not asking for numbers. I'm just so scared for him. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Let me take a look. He put me on hold. The silence felt like an eternity. When he came back on the line, his voice was different. It was tight and cold. Carol, he said. The trust was accessed. The entire amount was withdrawn last Tuesday. Last Tuesday. The day after the secret wedding, the money was gone. The wedding wasn't about love, it was a heist. Tiffany had gotten exactly what she came for, which left me with one terrifying question. What does she need my son for now? Of course. Here are the next 3 chapters of the story. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the wooden floor. Sarah rushed to my side, but I barely felt her hand on my shoulder. The money was gone. All of it. Tiffany had what she wanted. A cold, sharp fear pierced my heart. What was she going to do with my son now that he had nothing left to give her? The doorbell rang, a sharp sound that made both me and Sarah jump. At the door was a delivery man holding the biggest, most expensive bouquet of white lilies and roses I had ever seen. They were beautiful, but they felt cold and heavy, like funeral flowers. For Carol, the young man said, handing them to me. Tucked inside the flowers was a small, creamy envelope. With trembling hands, I pulled out the card. The note was written in perfect, loopy handwriting. Dear Carol, it read, heard you were feeling down. Thought these might cheer you up. We're so happy and want you to be happy for us. With love, Tiffany and Mark. It wasn't a kind gesture. It was a victory lap. It was Tiffany laughing at me, telling me she was in control, that she could steal my son's future and then send me flowers as if nothing was wrong. I walked straight past Sarah, carried the heavy glass vase to my back door, and threw the whole thing into the outside garbage can. The beautiful flowers landed right on top of last night's coffee grounds. This was a warning. She was telling me to stay away. And that's when I knew I had to get closer than ever before. That night, sleep was impossible. I walked through the dark, quiet rooms of my house, my mind racing. I ended up in the den, pulling a heavy photo album from the bookshelf. I sat on the floor and opened it, stopping on the last picture I ever took of my husband, Richard. He was in that sterile hospital bed, so thin and weak, but he was still smiling his real smile, the one that crinkled his eyes. I remembered our last conversation, his voice as thin and dry as paper. Carol, he had whispered, and I had to lean in close to hear him. You have to promise me something. Anything, my love, I told him, my tears falling onto his hand. Promise me you'll always protect our boy, he'd said, his grip surprisingly strong. He has a good heart, just like you. But he's too trusting. The world can be a hard place. You have to be his rock. Promise me you'll keep him safe. I squeezed his hand back, trying to pour all my love and strength into that one touch. I promise, Richard, I said, my voice choked with tears. I will always, always protect our son. It was the last promise I ever made to him. Staring at his picture now, I felt that promise echo in the deepest part of my soul. I had failed him. I had let a monster into our family, and she was hurting our boy. My sadness turned into a cold, hard anger. I had made a promise to the man I loved, and I would die before I broke it. My promise to Richard gave me strength, but I still had no plan. I couldn't knock on their door. Tiffany would never let me in. I couldn't call the police. All I had was a mother's fear, not hard proof. I was pacing in my living room, tidying things up to keep my hands busy, when my eyes fell on a small, empty box on a bookshelf. It was the box for the digital photo frame I had given my son, Mark, for his birthday last year. It was one of those new fancy frames. I could use a special app on my phone to send new pictures to it anytime I wanted, right over the internet. He loved it, said it made him feel like I was right there with him. My heart started to beat faster. The app was still on my phone. If the frame was still plugged in, if it was still connected to his internet, I could send a photo. Then I remembered a feature I had never used. When you sent a picture, the app could use the frame's little camera to show you a quick 1-second preview of the room, just to make sure the picture looked good on the wall. My whole body started to tremble. Could I get a glimpse inside that house? It was a huge risk. If Tiffany saw the screen light up unexpectedly, she'd know. But I had to try. My finger hovered over the app on my phone. I was about to peek through a keyhole, and I was terrified of what I might see. My finger trembled over the phone's screen. Spying on my own son felt wrong, but the memory of my promise to my dying husband pushed me forward. I had to see if he was safe. I chose an old, happy picture of my golden retriever Buddy from years ago. If they saw it, it would just look like a sweet memory. I held my breath and pressed the send button. For just 1 second, a blurry image from the frame's camera flashed on my phone. It was Mark's living room. But it was all wrong. Our old, comfortable couch was gone, replaced by a cold, gray thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. But I barely noticed the furniture. I saw my son, Mark. He was sitting on that new couch, staring blankly at a dark TV screen. He looked pale and so much thinner than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped forward, and his hands were just lying in his lap. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Then, just before the 1-second preview disappeared, Tiffany walked into the frame. She was holding a simple glass of water. She handed it to Mark, and he took it without even looking up at her. He drank all of it, like a robot taking orders. Then the image vanished, leaving my phone screen black. But the sight of that simple, ordinary glass of water was now burned into my mind. I stared at my blank phone, but all I could see was that 1-second video playing over and over in my head. It was so fast, but it told me everything I needed to know. My son was not okay. He was a ghost in his own home. He looked empty. I kept thinking about that glass of water. It seemed so normal, but the way he drank it, so automatically, felt wrong. Why did it bother me so much? Then I remembered. That one and only time my son, Mark, brought Tiffany to my house for dinner. I had offered everyone an iced tea. Mark took one, but Tiffany held up her hand and gave me a perfect plastic smile. "Oh, no thank you, Carol," she had said in her sweet voice. "I don't drink sugary things. I make my own special health drinks, all natural supplements and herbs. Mark is even starting to love them." Health drinks. The words echoed in my head now with a new, terrifying meaning. I stood up and started pacing my kitchen. What if it wasn't just plain water in that glass she gave him? What if she was putting her special herbs into his drinks every single day? What if she was making him weak on purpose, making him confused? The thought made me feel cold all over. She hadn't just stolen his money. I was suddenly, horribly sure that she was stealing his mind too, and I knew I was running out of time to get him back. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I had to tell someone who would believe me. I called the only person in the world who could possibly understand. Ben Peterson, the son of Tiffany's first dead husband. When he answered, the words just tumbled out of my mouth. Ben, it's Carol. I think she's drugging him. I saw her. I saw what she's doing. I quickly told him about the digital frame and the vacant look in my son Mark's eyes. Ben was quiet on the other end of the line. He didn't sound shocked, just sad and angry. I was afraid of this, he said, his voice low and grim. My father was always so tired near the end, so confused. Carol, you can't fight her alone from your house. An email and a phone call aren't enough to stop a monster like her. There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of him typing on a computer. I'm booking a flight, he said, his voice suddenly hard and full of purpose. I have a box of my father's old papers, evidence, things my lawyers told me weren't enough to prove anything back then. But maybe with your story, it's enough now. I'll be in Ohio tomorrow. He hung up. Tomorrow. Help was coming. For the first time, I felt a tiny surge of strength. Tiffany, or Jennifer, had hurt our families, but she was about to find out that we were going to start fighting back. Of course. Here are the next 3 chapters. The next afternoon, my doorbell rang. A tired-looking man stood on my porch, holding a small suitcase in one hand and a cardboard box in the other. He had the same sad, angry eyes I had heard in his voice on the phone. Carol? He asked quietly. I'm Ben. I led him inside to the dining room table where my friend Sarah was already waiting. He put the heavy box on the table between us. This is everything my lawyers gathered on her, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Letters, bank statements, legal documents. They told me it wasn't enough proof. He shuffled through a stack of files and pulled out a single sheet of paper, handing it to me. This is the last thing my father ever signed. It's a document that gave her control over all his money. His entire life savings was gone a week later. I looked down at the signature of Arthur Peterson. It was shaky and wobbly, almost like a child's handwriting. My heart started to pound. It looked so familiar. I ran to the drawer in the hall and pulled out the cold typed letter Tiffany had sent me. I laid it on the table right next to the document from Ben's father. The 2 signatures, Mark's and Arthur's, were a perfect match. They weren't real. They were both forgeries, clearly written by the same pretending hand. This was her signature move. We all stared at the 2 forged signatures side by side on my dining room table. It was like looking at a snake's calling card left behind at 2 different crimes. We finally had real, solid proof that my son Mark was a victim of a professional criminal. We have her real name now, Sarah said, tapping her pen on a notepad. Jennifer Stone. We need to find out where she came from. A monster like this isn't born, she's made. Sarah opened her laptop and got back to work. She started searching for Jennifer Stone from Ohio. At first, nothing seemed right. There were too many of them. But then she found one with a middle initial that matched the old marriage certificate from Nevada. The search led her to a website for old high school yearbooks. After a few minutes of clicking, she found it. Here she is, Sarah whispered. She turned the screen towards me and Ben. There she was, a picture of a 17-year-old girl with dark, hungry eyes that seemed to stare right through the screen. She wasn't smiling. She looked angry and ambitious. The name printed underneath the photo was Jennifer Jenny Stone. It was her. The same face, just younger and harder. But it was the name of the small, poor town underneath the school's name that gave us our next clue. She came from somewhere, I whispered. Ben looked at the screen, his face tight with anger. And people from somewhere always have family who know their secrets. We had a place now, a small town in Ohio called Northwood, but we didn't know anyone there. How could we find someone who knew the girl in the yearbook? Sarah, my clever Sarah, had an idea. She went on a social media website and found a group for people who had graduated from Northwood High School. She made a simple post. Does anyone here remember a student named Jenny Stone from the class of 2008? For an hour, nothing happened. I was starting to think it was a dead end. Then a message popped up. It was from a woman named Karen. Jenny Stone? The message read. Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in years. I remember her. We weren't friends. Nobody was. She was always saying she was going to get out of this town, marry a rich man, and never look back. Karen told us that Jenny came from a very poor family and was so ashamed of it. She was obsessed with money and fancy things. Then Karen wrote a final message that made all three of us lean in closer to the screen. She had a younger sister, Lisa, the message said. Jenny was always so mean to her. When Jenny left town for good, she told her sister she was dead to her. I think Lisa might still live around here. A sister. A sister who was left behind. A sister who probably had 15 years of anger and secrets just waiting to be told. A sister. The word was like a key turning in a lock we didn't even know was there. A sister named Lisa. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard again, searching for Lisa Stone from the small town of Northwood, Ohio. It was a common name, but after a few minutes she found one who was the right age, living in a town just a few hours' drive from me. Her profile picture showed a tired-looking woman with 2 young children. We had a name and a location, but what to do next was a huge risk. What if she's still loyal to her sister? Ben asked, his voice low and worried. What if she calls Tiffany and warns her that we're looking into her? And what if she's just as scared of her as we are? I replied, my voice quiet. What if she's been waiting all these years for someone to finally listen to her? I knew in my heart that I had to be the one to talk to her. This wasn't a job for a lawyer or for Ben. This was a job for a mother. Sarah found a phone number, and my heart pounded in my chest as I wrote it down. The next morning, I drove to a quiet park down the street so I could make the call alone. I dialed the number, my hand shaking. A woman's voice answered, sounding cautious. Hello? Is this Lisa Stone? I asked. Yes. Who is this? I took a deep breath. My name is Carol. I need to talk to you about your sister, Jenny. The line went completely silent. The silence on the other end of the phone was so long and heavy that I thought she had hung up. I could hear the faint sound of a child laughing in the background on her end. Finally, Lisa's voice came back, but it was cold and hard, like a wall going up. I'm sorry, she said. You have the wrong number. I don't have a sister. She was about to hang up. I could feel it. I had one last chance. Wait, I said, my voice desperate and loud. Please, just wait. She's not using that name anymore. Now she calls herself Tiffany. Tiffany Miller. There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. It was a sound of pure pain, and it was followed by a sob. Oh no, Lisa cried, her voice breaking into a million pieces. Who did she hurt now? I told her everything, about my son, Mark, and how he had changed, about Ben's father who had died. As I spoke, Lisa just wept quietly. I'm so sorry, she said when I was finished. You have to believe me, my sister isn't just a liar. She's sick. She was born without a heart. I think she's a sociopath. She paused, and then her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. She's done this before. There's something you don't know. A way she controls them. It's how she makes them so quiet and obedient. What do you mean? I asked, my own heart starting to pound. What does she do? Lisa took a long, shaky breath before she spoke again. Ever since we were teenagers, Tiffany, was obsessed with herbs and old remedies. She read all these strange old books. She learned how to mix plants and flowers together to make things. At first, I didn't understand what she was trying to tell me. It just sounded strange, not dangerous. She called it her special tea, or her health drinks, Lisa continued, her voice trembling. She bragged to me once, a long time ago, that she had a special recipe, a recipe to make people calm and agreeable, to make them easy to persuade. My blood ran cold. The health drinks Tiffany had mentioned at my dinner table. The glass of water I saw her give to my son, Mark, through the photo frame. He wasn't just confused because she was twisting his mind with words. It's not just herbs, Carol, Lisa said, and her voice was now a terrified whisper that I had to strain to hear. She mixes them with sedatives, powerful ones she buys from strange websites online. It's not a health drink, it's poison, A slow, quiet poison that makes them too tired and confused to fight back or even ask questions. Poison. The word hung in the air, more terrifying than anything else I had learned. My son wasn't just being robbed, he was being poisoned, a little bit every single day. We weren't just running out of time to save his mind. We were running out of time to save his life. Of course. Here are the next 3 chapters of your story. I hung up the phone with Lisa, Tiffany's sister, and the single word poison was screaming in my head. I stumbled back to my dining room table and told Ben and Sarah everything. When I finished, a thick, heavy silence fell over the room. It was broken by Ben, who stood up and started pacing back and forth across my old wooden floor. "My father," he said, his voice choked with anger. He was always so tired, so confused. That's what she did to him. I know it. We all knew we had to do something, and we had to do it fast. "We still can't go to the police," Sarah said, thinking like the paralegal she was. "All we have is a phone call. It's not proof. They'll think we are crazy. We need to get a sample of whatever she's giving him." But how could we get inside? Tiffany had my son, Mark, locked down like a prisoner. Ben suddenly stopped pacing. "When I was trying to get into my father's house," he said, his voice low, "my lawyer suggested something crazy. A fake emergency, something that would force everyone out of the house." I looked at him, my heart starting to pound. "Like a gas leak," I whispered, the words tasting like fear in my mouth. It was a dangerous, illegal, and terrifying idea. But when I looked at the determined faces of Ben and Sarah, I knew it was our only chance. We had to get the proof, and we were willing to risk everything to do it. The next evening, our desperate plan was in motion. I was parked down the street from my son Mark's house, my old car hidden behind a big oak tree. My heart was beating so fast, it felt like a hummingbird was trapped in my chest. Ben was in the passenger seat next to me, his cell phone in his hand. Sarah was parked a block away in her own car, acting as our lookout. Ben took a deep, steadying breath. "Ready, Carol?" he asked. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. He dialed 911. In a calm, worried voice that I barely recognized, he reported a strong smell of gas coming from his neighbor's house, giving Mark and Tiffany's address. After he hung up, we waited in the silent car. Every second felt like an hour. My mind was filled with all the ways this could go horribly wrong. Then we heard it. A faint siren in the distance, growing louder and louder. A huge red fire truck, its lights flashing and painting the street in red and blue, turned onto Mark's street. We saw the firefighters walk to the front door. A moment later, Mark and Tiffany came outside, looking annoyed. As soon as they were on the lawn talking to the fire chief, Ben grabbed my arm. "Go, Carol," he whispered urgently. "Go now. Use the back door." I slipped out of the car and ran, keeping low behind the bushes, my whole body shaking with fear. My hand fumbled with the knob on the back door of my son's house. I prayed it would be unlocked. With a soft click, it turned. I slipped inside, closing it silently behind me. The house was cold and quiet. It didn't feel like Mark's home anymore. It felt like a stranger's house. All of his warm, comfortable things were gone. His books, the silly souvenirs from our family vacations, the pictures of his father. All that was left was Tiffany's cold, modern, expensive furniture. I didn't have time to be sad. I ran on my tiptoes to the kitchen. My eyes darted everywhere. Where would a monster hide her poison? In the spice rack? In the medicine cabinet? I remembered what Tiffany's sister Lisa had said. Tiffany was obsessed with her special things. She would keep them somewhere safe. I pulled open the door to the pantry and my eyes scanned the shelves of normal food. Cereal, pasta, canned soup. Then I saw it. On the very top shelf, tucked away behind a big box of crackers, was a small, locked metal box. A cash box. It didn't belong on a pantry shelf. My heart leaped into my throat. This had to be it. I could hear the firefighters' voices getting louder from the front yard. I had no key and no time. But as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, I knew I couldn't leave without what was inside. My fingers stretched and finally brushed against the cold metal of the locked box. I pulled it down from the high shelf. It was heavier than it looked. My heart sank. A locked box. I had no key, no tools, nothing to pry it open with. Outside, I could hear Tiffany's sharp, annoyed voice arguing with one of the firefighters. I was running out of time. They could all come back inside at any second. Then an old memory flashed in my mind. A memory from high school, of my best friend Mary showing me how to pick the lock on her diary. My mother would have been horrified. I reached up and pulled a bobby pin from my gray hair. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely straighten it out. I stuck the thin metal end into the tiny lock, just like Mary had shown me all those years ago. I wiggled it back and forth, trying to feel for the little click she told me to listen for. My whole body was tense. Any second I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder. For a moment I thought it was hopeless. My fingers were too clumsy with fear. Then I heard it. A tiny click. The lock popped open. I held my breath and slowly, carefully, lifted the lid of the box. What I saw inside made all the blood drain from my face. The first thing I saw, right on top, was a clear plastic bag full of dried, crushed leaves. They had a strange, sickly sweet smell that filled the small pantry. This was it. This had to be the poison she was feeding my son Mark every day. My hands trembled as I lifted the bag of herbs out of the box, but underneath it was something even more shocking. Underneath it was her entire secret life. There were passports, not just one or two. There were 5 of them. Each one had her picture, but a different name printed underneath. Jennifer Stone, Tiffany Miller, Catherine Gable, Emily White. There were driver's licenses from 5 different states. There were birth certificates. All of them looked real. All of them were fake. This wasn't just a woman who lied about her name to escape a poor family. This was a professional criminal. She had a whole collection of identities. She could disappear and become a completely new person in a matter of hours. I knew I had to take everything as proof. I grabbed the bag of herbs and a handful of the fake IDs just as I heard a firefighter's heavy boots right outside on the back porch. Then I heard Tiffany's voice, sharp and angry. "This is ridiculous. I'm going back inside." She was coming in, and I was trapped. My heart leaped into my throat. There was no time to think. I shoved the fake IDs and the bag of poison deep into my coat pocket. I didn't even have time to close the lid of the metal box. I just gently pushed the pantry door, leaving it open just a tiny crack so it would look normal. I squeezed my body into the dark, narrow space between the pantry and the refrigerator, praying the shadows would hide me. I held my breath, my body as still and as cold as stone. The back door opened. I could hear Tiffany's high heels clicking on the tile floor. She was just a few feet from where I was hiding. I could smell her perfume. She let out a loud, annoyed sigh. "Mark, get in here," she yelled towards the front of the house. "The fire chief needs to talk to us again." I heard her turn around and walk back out the door, her footsteps fading away. It was now or never. I didn't wait for a second thought. I slipped out from my hiding spot, ran to the back door, and didn't stop running until I was safely back in Ben's car, hidden by the darkness of the night. I collapsed into the passenger seat, gasping for air. "Did you get it, Carol?" Ben asked, his voice tense. I couldn't speak. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out the bag of strange herbs and the stack of fake passports. I laid them on the dashboard between us. It was her entire world, and it was now in my hands. Back at my house, we spread the evidence across my old dining room table. It felt like something out of a movie. The fake passports with Tiffany's smiling face under different names. The stack of forged documents. And in the middle of it all, the plastic bag of dried, crushed leaves. It looked so harmless, like something you would buy at a health food store, but it felt like a coiled snake, ready to strike. "This is the key to everything," Ben said, pointing a shaky finger at the bag of herbs. "The fake IDs prove she's a con artist. This could prove she's a potential murderer. We have to get it tested." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We can't take it to the police lab. They'd ask too many questions about how we broke into the house to get it." Ben's face was grim. "I know a place," he said. a private lab that my lawyers used during my father's case. It's expensive, but they are completely private. We can trust them. He carefully took a small sample of the herbs, sealed it in a plastic bag, and put it in a small box to be mailed overnight. After Ben dropped the package off at the post office, all we could do was wait. The results would take 2 days. It was the longest and most agonizing 2 days of my life. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that my son, Mark, was still in that house, drinking her poison. For 2 days, the three of us, me, Ben, and Sarah, barely slept. We drank pot after pot of coffee and mostly just sat in silence, waiting. Then, on the third morning, Ben's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. "It's the lab," he said, and put the call on speakerphone for all of us to hear. A man with a calm, professional voice was on the other end of the line. "We've completed the analysis of the plant matter you sent us," the man said. "It's a complex blend of herbs, but we found a primary active ingredient. It's a high concentration of a powerful cardiotoxic sedative." I didn't understand what that meant. What does that do to a person?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man on the phone paused for a moment. "In small, regular doses, it would cause extreme fatigue, confusion, short-term memory loss, and a highly suggestible compliant state. In a larger dose, it would cause the heart to stop. It's a very dangerous and controlled substance, ma'am. It's a poison." The scientist had confirmed it. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. We had scientific proof that Tiffany was poisoning my son. Ben hung up the phone. We finally had the weapon we needed to stop her for good. We had everything: the fake names, the forgeries, the pattern of deceit, and now, the lab results that proved she was using poison. We had more than enough to go to the police and have her quietly arrested. But as I looked at Ben's face, twisted with anger and grief for his father, I knew that a quiet arrest wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for what she did to his family. And it wasn't enough for what she was doing to my son. "A quiet arrest won't work," Ben said, his voice as hard as stone. "She's a master liar. She would find a way to twist the story to make herself the victim. We can't give her that chance. She needs to be exposed. The whole world needs to see the monster hiding behind that pretty smile." He was right. She had humiliated me and destroyed his family. She didn't deserve to just disappear into a prison cell. She deserved to have her perfect fake world come crashing down all around her. Sarah opened her laptop. "If we're going to do this," she said, "we need a stage, a big one." She went to Tiffany's social media page, which was now filled with pictures of her fancy new life. And then Sarah found it. "Oh, this is perfect," she said with a grim smile. She pointed to a new post. Tiffany was the host of a big, fancy charity fundraiser in 2 weeks for a local children's hospital. She was going to be on a stage, giving a speech. She wanted a spotlight. We would give her one. A charity ball for sick children. The thought of Tiffany standing on a stage, pretending to be a good and caring person, made my stomach turn. But it was the perfect place to show everyone in our town her true face. There was just one problem. "How do we even get in?" I asked, looking at Ben and Sarah. "These kinds of fancy events are for rich people. The tickets cost thousands of dollars." Ben, who had been quiet, didn't even hesitate. "We buy our way in," he said, his voice firm. "We'll make a donation so large they can't possibly ignore it. My father's money paid for this fake life she's living. It's only right that his money helps us bring it all down." Sarah quickly pointed out another problem. "We can't use our real names. If she's helping with the event, she might see the donor list and get suspicious." So, we decided to use one of Tiffany's own tricks against her. Ben went online and made a very large donation to the Children's Hospital in the name of Ms. Catherine Gable, one of the names from her fake passports. A few days later, a thick, creamy envelope arrived in my mail. It was a formal invitation to the fundraiser. Holding it in my hand, it all felt terribly real. We had our ticket to the final act of Tiffany's show, and we were going to make sure it had a very unhappy ending. The night before the fundraiser, I couldn't sit still. I paced back and forth on the old wooden floors of my quiet house. The fancy invitation sat on my dining room table like a ticking time bomb. My stomach was twisted in knots. What were we about to do? I kept seeing my son Mark's face in my mind. Not the empty, ghost-like face I saw through the camera, but my real Mark. The little boy with scraped knees and a big, happy smile. When we exposed Tiffany, we would be exposing him too. The whole world would see him as a fool, as a victim. Was I destroying my son's life just to save it? The doubt was like a poison in my own heart, and for a moment, I wanted to call the whole thing off. I picked up my phone to call Ben and tell him I couldn't do it. But before I could dial his number, my phone rang. It was Ben. "You okay, Carol?" he asked, his voice quiet, as if he knew what I was thinking. "I can't do it, Ben," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I'm his mother. My job is to protect him from shame, not throw him right into it." "She is the one hurting him, Carol," Ben said, his voice suddenly hard and clear. "Letting her get away with this is what will destroy him. Remember my father. We have to do this. We have to finish it." He was right. My fear was getting in the way. I had made a promise to my dying husband. I had to finish it. The next evening, my resolve was back. As I stood in my bedroom getting ready, my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. There were no words. It was just a picture. My blood ran cold. It was a photo of my house, taken from across the street in the darkness. The lights were on in my living room, and I could just barely see my own shadow moving behind the curtains. Someone was out there, watching me. Right now. My hands started to shake. Then a second message popped up from the same unknown number. It was only 2 words. "Stay home." Tiffany. It had to be her. She didn't know our plan, but she was a cornered animal, and she sensed that something was wrong. She was trying to scare me into backing down. For a terrifying second, it almost worked. The thought of her, or someone she hired, watching my every move, made me want to lock my doors and hide under the covers. But then I thought of my son, Mark, looking like a ghost in his own house. I thought of him drinking her poison. My fear turned into a cold, hard rage. She thought she could scare me? I typed back a single word. No. Then I deleted the messages, put on my coat, and grabbed my purse. The war was coming to an end tonight. I stood in front of my closet, the threatening text message still feeling cold on my phone screen. The simple coat and dress I had laid out on my bed felt wrong. This wasn't a night for being quiet or for blending in. This was a night for making a stand. My hands moved past my everyday clothes to the very back of the closet, to a dress bag I had not unzipped in years. Inside was a simple, elegant black dress. It was the one I had worn to my husband Richard's funeral. Some people might think it was a strange, sad choice for a party. But to me, it felt like armor. It was the dress I wore on the day I became a widow, the day I promised to be strong for my son. As I put it on, I felt Richard's strength settle over my shoulders like a warm shawl. I was no longer just a scared old woman. I was a widow, here to defend her husband's memory and to save their only child. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale and my eyes were filled with a cold, hard determination. The woman looking back at me was a woman who had nothing left to lose, and I knew that made me the most dangerous woman in that entire ballroom. It was time to go. The hotel ballroom was like something out of a fairy tale. Giant crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and the room was filled with important-looking people in expensive tuxedos and glittering dresses. They were all laughing and sipping champagne. It all felt so fake and wrong. They were smiling and pretending, while my son was a prisoner in his own life, just a few miles away. Ben, Sarah, and I stood by the grand entrance, completely invisible in the loud, fancy crowd. We were 3 ghosts at a party, and we were there to haunt the host. Then I saw her. Tiffany was across the room, the center of attention, of course. She was laughing her perfect fake laugh. She wore a sparkling silver dress and looked like a movie star, and standing silently beside her, looking pale and lost in his tuxedo, was my son, Mark. He was holding a drink, but he just stared straight ahead, his eyes as empty and dull as a doll's. Seeing him like that, so broken and empty, washed away the last little bit of fear I had left. My doubt was gone. I was not there to cause him shame. I was there to save him from the beautiful, smiling monster standing right beside him. Just then, a man on the stage tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please give a warm welcome to our gracious host for the evening, the wonderful Mrs. Tiffany Miller." The room erupted in applause. The show was about to begin, and so was our trap. As Tiffany walked towards the stage, blowing little kisses to the clapping crowd, I knew it was my turn to move. "Wish me luck," I whispered to Ben and Sarah, and then I slipped away from them. I made my way around the edge of the huge ballroom, staying in the shadows. My target was at the very back of the room, where all the sound and video equipment was set up on a long table. A bored-looking young man in a black polo shirt was sitting at a big control board, watching the stage. I walked right up to him. He looked up, surprised to see an old woman like me back there. Before he could ask what I wanted, I opened my purse. Inside was a thick envelope full of cash that Ben had given me for this exact moment. The young man's eyes went wide when he saw the money. "I need a favor," I said, my voice low and steady so no one else could hear. I also had a small USB drive in my other hand. "When the speaker gets to the part of her speech where she thanks her husband," I whispered, "you don't play the video of him that she gave you. You play what's on this drive instead, and you make sure the volume is turned all the way up." He looked from the money to the drive, then back to the desperate look in my eyes. After a long second, he gave a tiny nod and took them both. I had done my part. Now I could only pray that he would keep his promise. I slipped back into the shadows beside Ben and Sarah. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "It's done," I whispered. "Now we wait." On stage, Tiffany was glowing under the bright lights. She was a great actress. She spoke about the importance of charity and helping poor children, her voice dripping with fake kindness. The rich crowd loved her. They were hanging on her every word. It made me sick to my stomach. Then came the moment we were waiting for. "And of course," she said, placing a dramatic hand over her heart, "I couldn't do any of this without the love and support of my wonderful, devoted husband, Mark." She smiled and gestured to my son, who was sitting at a table near the front. A spotlight hit him, and he just blinked, looking confused and lost. That was the signal. I held my breath. A picture of Mark was supposed to appear on the two giant screens behind Tiffany's head. Instead, the screens flickered and went black for a terrifying second. Then, a new image flashed onto both screens. It wasn't a picture of my son. It was a photo of her first marriage certificate from Nevada. Her real name, Jennifer Stone, was circled in bright, angry red. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. On stage, Tiffany's perfect smile froze and then melted from her face. Tiffany stared at the giant screen behind her, her face turning a chalky white. She tried to laugh it off, a high, nervous sound. "Oh my," she said into the microphone, her voice trembling. "It seems we have a little technical problem." But it wasn't a problem. It was an attack. The image on the screen changed again. This time, it was a picture of one of her fake driver's licenses, with the name Catherine Gable. Then another flashed up for Emily White. One after another, her secret identities flashed on the screens for everyone to see. The crowd was not confused anymore. They were whispering loudly, pointing at the screens and then pointing at the woman on the stage. The happy party atmosphere was gone, replaced by a thick, ugly feeling of scandal. Then, a picture of a kind-looking old man appeared on the screen. It was Ben's father, Arthur Peterson. Underneath his picture, big white letters spelled out the words, "Her first husband died 6 months after their wedding." Standing next to me in the darkness, Ben let out a long, shaky breath. Tiffany's eyes darted to the back of the room, searching for the young man at the control board. She looked panicked, like a trapped animal. But the young man just stared down at his controls, refusing to look at her. She was trapped on that stage, with all her sins displayed for the world to see. She opened her mouth to scream, but just then, the screens changed again, and a video started to play. The face that appeared on the giant screens was not another fake ID. It was a real woman with tired, sad eyes. It was her sister, Lisa. She was sitting in a simple kitchen, looking right into the camera. The entire noisy ballroom went completely silent. "My name is Lisa Stone," she began, her voice shaking, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "The woman on that stage, who calls herself Tiffany Miller, is my older sister, Jennifer Stone." Everyone in the room was frozen, listening to Lisa's recorded story. She told them about their poor childhood. She told them about her sister's dangerous obsession with money and her cruelty. "She isn't capable of love," Lisa said, and now tears were streaming down her face. "She was born with a hole in her heart where the love is supposed to be. She only knows how to use people. She uses them up, and when she's done, she throws them away." On stage, Tiffany stood like a statue made of ice, her face a mask of pure hatred. Then Lisa, on the screen, looked directly into the camera, as if she was speaking to every person in that room. "She told me once," Lisa said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that all rich men were fools, and that her special talent was helping them die with a smile on their face." A loud, collective gasp echoed through the entire ballroom. The shocked gasp of the crowd was like a wave crashing in the silent room. All eyes were on Tiffany, the monster on the stage. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was watching my son, Mark. He was still sitting at the front table, trapped in the bright, lonely circle of a spotlight. All night he had been a handsome, empty statue. But now something was changing. His head, which had been hanging low, slowly lifted. He blinked his eyes once, then twice, like a man waking up from a long and terrible dream. He looked from the giant screen, where his wife's sister was still frozen with tears on her face, to the real woman standing on the stage. He looked at Tiffany, and for the first time in so many months, I saw a flicker of light in his eyes. It wasn't a happy light. It was a flicker of pure, dawning horror. He slowly pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly across the polished floor. The whole room held its breath. He stood up and pointed a shaking finger at the woman he had married. "Jenny," he whispered, his voice raspy and confused. He said the name she thought she had buried forever. Hearing that name, her real name, spoken by her husband's lips, was the thing that finally made Tiffany snap. Hearing her real name, the name from her poor and miserable past, was what finally broke her. The frozen mask of shock on her face twisted into a snarl of pure, ugly rage. She grabbed the microphone stand, her knuckles turning white. "Yes!" she screamed, and the sound blasted through the speakers, making people jump. "Is that what you all wanted to hear? Yes, my name is Jenny Stone, and I'm not ashamed of it. I did what I had to do to get away from my pathetic, dirt-poor family." She was raving now, completely out of control. She pointed a shaking finger out into the crowd, right at me. "And you sad old woman, your idiot son was the easiest one of them all. He believed every sweet word I whispered, just like that stupid old man in Nevada believed it." She threw her head back and laughed, a wild, terrible sound that didn't have any happiness in it. She was confessing to everything, right there on the stage, in front of hundreds of witnesses. The rich people in the crowd were backing away from the stage, their faces a mixture of fear and disgust. Tiffany raised the microphone to scream again, but just then, the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the hotel staff, it was the police. 2 uniformed police officers walked calmly through the terrified, whispering crowd. They walked with a purpose, their faces grim, and they didn't stop until they were standing at the foot of the stage. Tiffany stopped screaming. She just stared down at them, her mouth hanging open, her wild rage suddenly gone. The entire huge ballroom was completely silent. "Jennifer Stone, also known as Tiffany Miller," the officer said, his voice loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and suspicion of aggravated assault." She didn't fight. She didn't say another word. All the fire seemed to drain right out of her, leaving behind a small, pathetic-looking woman in a fancy, sparkling dress. One of the officers walked up the stage steps, gently took the microphone from her limp hand, and snapped a pair of handcuffs on her wrists. The sharp click of the metal echoed in the huge, quiet room. They led her down the steps and through the crowd of shocked, whispering people she had tried so hard to impress. Her grand party had ended with her greatest humiliation. It was finally over. But as I watched them lead her away, my victory felt empty. I looked over at my son, Mark, who was standing all alone in the middle of the room, looking completely and utterly broken. The monster was gone. But what had she left behind? The noise of the crowd was a distant buzz in my ears. I didn't see the rich people in their fancy clothes pointing their phones at the stage, whispering and gossiping. I only saw one person. My son, Mark. He was standing like a lost child in the middle of the room, all alone while the world stared at him. Ben put a gentle hand on my arm. "Go to him, Carol," he whispered. So I walked. I left the shadows at the edge of the room and walked onto the polished dance floor. The crowd seemed to part for me, their curious eyes following me. I didn't care about them. I just kept my eyes on my son. I walked until I was standing right in front of him. He looked down at me, and his eyes were full of a shame so deep it cracked my heart in two. "Mom," he whispered, his voice raspy and broken. It was the first time he had called me that in so many months. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say, "Are you okay?" There were no words big enough for a moment like this. I just opened my arms. For a second, he just stood there, frozen. Then, he collapsed forward, into my embrace. I held my tall, grown-up son as he sobbed like a little boy, right there in the middle of that big, fancy room. The monster was gone. I had my boy back. But I had no idea how I was going to fix all his broken pieces. Getting out of that hotel was a nightmare. Reporters were waiting for us, shouting questions, their cameras flashing like a lightning storm. Ben and Sarah shielded us and helped me get my son, Mark, into the back of Ben's rental car. We drove back to my house in complete heavy silence. The story of the Black Widow bride, as the newspapers started calling Tiffany, was all over the news. Our lives became a circus of meetings with lawyers, detectives, and doctors. The doctors confirmed what we already knew. Mark's blood was full of the powerful sedative Tiffany had been feeding him for months. They said his body would heal, but his mind was a different story. As the drug slowly left his system, he just got quieter. He slept 12 hours a day. When he was awake, he would just sit in my living room and stare out the window for hours, his face blank with shame. It was like the real Mark was still trapped somewhere deep inside, too hurt to come out. The lawyers said our case was perfect. Tiffany or Jenny was facing a very long time in prison, but none of that mattered to me. All I cared about was the broken man sitting in my armchair. Then one afternoon, he spoke for the first time in days. "She told me you didn't love me anymore," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was the first crack in the wall he had built around himself. Months passed. The news cameras and reporters finally packed up and went away to find a new story. Tiffany was found guilty and sent to prison for a very, very long time. The world moved on. But in my small, quiet house, our healing was just beginning. My son, Mark, stayed with me. At first, it was painfully awkward. The house was filled with a sad silence. We were like two strangers, trying to learn how to talk to each other again after a terrible war. He started seeing a therapist, a kind woman who helped him sort through the shame and confusion that Tiffany had so carefully built inside his mind. Slowly, like the first flowers in spring, I started to see glimmers of my old son again. It started with little things. One afternoon, he laughed at a silly joke on the television. A few days later, he helped me with the crossword puzzle, just like he used to. We were rebuilding our family, one quiet conversation at a time. It wasn't the same as it was before. We were both quieter, both scarred by what had happened. But in a strange way, we were closer now. We had survived the storm together. One evening, we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. He turned to me, his eyes finally clear and serious. "Mom," he said, "there's something I have to ask you." I knew from the look on his face that this was the question I had been both waiting for and dreading. Of course. Here are the next 3 chapters. We sat there on the back porch as the sky turned from orange to a deep purple. My son, Mark, looked down at his own hands, which were resting on the small patio table between us. "How can you ever forgive me?" he asked, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the evening crickets. After everything I did, after everything I let her do to you, I chose her. I believed all her lies about you. How can you even stand to look at me? Tears welled up in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of love. I reached across the table and took his hand in mine. "Oh, Mark," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "There is absolutely nothing to forgive." He looked up at me, his eyes full of confusion and shame. "You didn't choose her," I told him, my grip on his hand tightening. "She stole you from me. You were sick, honey. That monster, she put poison in your body and poison in your mind. A person is not responsible for what they do when they are sick. You were her victim, just as much as Ben's father was." He looked at me, really looked at me, and I think for the first time, he finally believed it. He wasn't a bad son. He was a survivor. The long, terrible war was finally over, and in our little backyard, peace was finally declared. The weeks after that conversation on the porch were much lighter. It felt like a great weight had been lifted from both our shoulders. The trial was a big sensation in the news, but Mark and I didn't go. We didn't need to. The evidence was perfect. The forged documents, the bank records from Ben's father's case, and the heartbreaking video of her own sister's testimony. It was more than enough. The jury found Tiffany, or I should say, Jennifer Stone, guilty on all charges. The judge called her a predator with a heart of ice and sentenced her to the maximum number of years in prison. She would be a very old woman before she ever saw the outside world again. But the story didn't end there. To try and get a lighter sentence, Tiffany started talking. She gave the police names and addresses. It turned out she was just a small part of a much bigger criminal ring that targeted lonely, wealthy people all across the country. Her testimony led to a dozen more arrests. It was a strange feeling. We had only set out to save my son, but in the end, we had helped save a lot of other people too. Her entire evil world had crumbled, all because she sent one cruel text message to the wrong mother. About a month after the sentencing, I got a phone call from the local police department. They told me they had recovered some personal items from the house Tiffany had shared with Mark. They said there was something there for me. Mark and I drove down to the station together. A kind detective led us into a small, quiet room and placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was a simple, plain gold band. It was my husband Richard's wedding ring. The ring Tiffany had stolen from my secret memory box and worn on her own finger. Seeing it again felt like closing a painful circle. The detective slid the ring across the table to me. "It's yours, ma'am," he said gently. I looked at Mark. His eyes were sad, but they were clear and strong. "I don't think it should be in the house anymore, Mom," he said quietly. "It's not just a memory of Dad now. It's a memory of her too." He was right. We couldn't let her poison that precious memory. The next day we went to the bank together. We put the ring in a safety deposit box. It wasn't just a symbol of our past anymore. It was a symbol of our family's survival. It was something we had fought for and had finally made safe for the future. A year passed. The seasons changed, the snows came and melted, and the terrible memories began to feel less like a sharp, open wound and more like a distant, faded scar. We decided to celebrate my son Mark's 30th birthday quietly, just the two of us. I baked his favorite cake, chocolate with thick chocolate frosting, just like I did when he was a little boy. He was a different person from the broken man I had brought home from that horrible party. He was working at a new job he loved, and he was smiling his real smile again, the one that crinkled his eyes just like his father's used to. The light was finally back. "I have something for you, Mom," he said after we had blown out the candles. He handed me a small velvet box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a beautiful, simple silver locket. I clicked it open. On one side was a tiny picture of my late husband, Richard, from our wedding day. On the other side was a tiny picture of Mark, grinning. "It's for all the memories she couldn't steal," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he fastened it around my neck. I held the locket in my hand, feeling the warmth of it against my skin. The hole that Tiffany had torn in our family was finally, truly healed. Life settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. Mark eventually got his own apartment in a nice building just 10 minutes away, but he still came over for dinner 3 times a week. I spent my mornings in my garden, pulling weeds and talking to my rose bushes. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a deep and genuine sense of peace. The constant, buzzing worry that had been my shadow for so long was finally gone. My son was safe, he was happy, he was himself again. Sometimes when the sun was warm on my back and I was digging in the dirt, I would talk to my late husband, Richard, as if he were right there beside me. "I did it, my love," I'd whisper to the quiet air. "I kept my promise. I kept our boy safe. And I knew, somewhere, that he would be proud." I had learned that true strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about what you do after you've been broken. Tiffany had tried to burn my world to the ground, but she didn't realize that some things, like a mother's love for her child, are fireproof. That evening, Mark came over, and we just sat on the porch swing together, watching the fireflies, not needing to say a single word. The quiet peace was the most beautiful sound in the entire world. A few weeks later, I got a call from our friend, Ben Peterson, out in Nevada. The three of us, me, Mark, and Ben, had kept in touch. We were a strange little family, forged in the fire of Tiffany's cruelty. "I've been thinking, Carol," he said, his voice serious. "The police recovered some of my father's money. I don't want it. It feels tainted. But I want to do something good with it." I listened as he told me his idea. "What if we started a small foundation?" he suggested. "We could use the money to help other families who have been victims of these kinds of romance scams. We could help them pay for lawyers, for therapy. We could be the help that we never had." I was so touched by his idea that I could barely speak. Taking the worst thing that had ever happened to us and turning it into something that could help other people, it felt like the perfect final chapter to our story. So we did it. We started the little foundation. It was a lot of work, but it was the best kind of work. We were turning our pain into a shield to protect other people. We couldn't change our past, but we could help give other people a better future. Our little foundation was starting to make a real difference in the world. We were getting letters and emails from people all across the country who had been hurt by predators like Tiffany. My days, which had once been so empty and sad, were now filled with a new purpose. I was helping other people put their own broken pieces back together. One Tuesday afternoon, I was sorting through the mail at my kitchen table. There were bills, some junk mail, and then I saw it. It was a plain white envelope with no return address. My name, Mrs. Carol Miller, was handwritten on the front in shaky cursive. I opened it, curious. Inside was a letter from a woman I had never met. "Dear Mrs. Miller," it began, "I am writing to you because I read about what that woman, Jennifer Stone, did to your son. I am so sorry for what your family went through. I am writing to you today because I believe she did the same thing to my brother, almost 20 years ago." My breath caught in my throat. 20 years ago. This was from before Ben's father. This was from the very beginning. "No one ever believed me," she wrote. "But there was something I saw, a detail that was never mentioned in her trial." My hands started to tremble as I kept reading the letter. The woman's name was Rachel, and her story was both different and chillingly the same. "My brother wasn't rich," she wrote. "That's what confused the police when he died, but he worked for a very rich and powerful man. Jenny, that's what she called herself then, wasn't interested in my brother's small savings account. She was interested in his boss." The next words made my heart stop. The day after my brother died of a sudden heart attack, I saw Jenny leaving town. She wasn't alone. She got into a long, black, expensive car. The man who was driving it was my brother's powerful boss. He helped her disappear. I am sure of it. A powerful man. An accomplice. All the news reports, all the police files, said that Tiffany, that Jennifer, had always acted alone. But this letter was telling a different, darker story. She didn't just get away with her crimes because she was clever and cruel. She got away with them because someone rich and powerful helped her, hiding her in the shadows. All this time, we thought we had cut the head off the snake. But what if we had only cut off one of its tentacles? What if the real monster was still out there, free and powerful, thinking he had gotten away with it all? I stood in my quiet, safe kitchen, holding the letter in my hand. I could have thrown it away. I could have pretended I never read it. My son, Mark, was safe now. I had my peaceful life back. It would have been so easy to just let it go, to decide that it wasn't my fight anymore. But as I stood there, I thought about that woman, Rachel, and her brother, a victim that no one had ever fought for. I thought about Ben's father. I thought about my own son. I looked down at the silver locket around my neck, the symbol of our family's new beginning. I had learned how to fight, and I knew my fight wasn't over yet. I picked up the phone and dialed Ben's number. "Ben," I said, my voice steady and clear when he answered. "It's Carol. I think we missed a piece of the puzzle. I think there's another chapter to this story." I looked out the window at my peaceful little street. I thought our story was over, that the monster was locked away for good. But I was starting to realize that we had only caught her apprentice. The real master was still out there, and he had no idea that a quiet old widow from Ohio was about to come looking for him.